For more information, please visit our website at DarkCybernetics.com. This is Dark Cybernetics Graphic Design Complete Series, Episode 1, Blender HotKeys. Follow along with our free course documentation. In this episode, we'll talk about using the Blender tool, some important tools and techniques we can utilize while creating graphics for our game or our personal project or for other academic assignments. The Blender tool is a free tool, as well as there are other 3D modeling tools which are a bit more expensive and have perhaps a bit more functionality. But for the cost of free, the Blender tool is a great project. The tool also has built-in functionality for Python. It also has a Blender game engine. The tool itself is used to produce certain cinematic movies, which will also be advantageous for those who would like to create their own movies or opening cinematics for games or for videos or even for video introductions or endings. The Blender tool would be a great first tool for those who have a computer. The Blender tool does require a graphics card, but your system can be annealed to optimize your performance. So to begin, we will first go to blender.org and download the tool. The tool updates ever so often, and the version used in this video may not be the current version used in your particular experiment. There are also publications which can be used to produce decent functional Blender systems. Blender has support for environmental effects, lighting. It has support for extra camera angles. There is support for grabbing faces of polygons, obscuring objects. There is a rigging model enabled in the system. We can devise a skeleton for our humanoid model, or we could make and also download models. We can create low poly models and have them for our own uses, or we can also create tools and use them for sale. If we want to make our own tools or our own objects, suppose you want to make a car for a game or a car for 3D modeling, we could also use the Blender paint tools, which may not be called paint tools, but they can be used to brush and create textures for our environments. We can create castles or other objects using the tool. Once Blender has been installed, we will have a splash screen, and there are daily tips which you can go through, and there also is support material from the blender.org website for creating other activities. There are also movies and other events, and since the tool is free, there is sponsorship as well as other activities we can use from the Blender. So we will first go over different parts of the tool. The Blender tool has many faces, and with the tool we have a manual, and there are also from the website, if we did not like this version, we could also get previous versions of the Blender tool. On our left side we have a tab called Transform in the Tools section, and in the Tools section we have Edit, and we have Shading, Well, on the next tab, we have a tab called Create. On the Create tab, we have some geometric shapes, like the plane, the cube, the circle, spheres, there are cones, there's a torus. They have a monkey, which can be used for other assignments. It's just, you can see the complexity of the scale of coordinates and faces we can create using Blender. We have some code features. There is support for lamps that we wanted to point, or a spotlight. There's chimneys and air. There's also some support for text and making speakers and sound. Keep in mind this tool also can be used for making games and other movies, so having a timeline may be important later, which we may get into later. There's a tab called Relations, and in Relations there's groups, and they are talking about parenting objects. You may want your left and right arm to be the same. You can think about linking objects, having a proxied location. There is a tab for animations, and we can think about motions in keyframes. We say keyframe, we mean the starting frame, and then about ending frames. So if your character jumps, we might want to animate or slur the motion of a character. There's a tab for physics, and inside the physics tab we can add and remove physics as need be necessary. We can change shapes and masses, and for our transform. We also have a grease pencil tab, and in the grease pencil tab we have some features we can use. So over across the top we have a tab for files. If we click the file tab, there's a new, an open, there's a recent tab. We can restore sessions in case our computer crashed during rendering something. We can also export and import models. The Blender tool supports importing for 3D Studio. There is a waveform, there's a Stanford, there's motion capture, there's FBX, and other formats. Also the scalable vector graphics, the .svg file is supported. For exports, we can export, they have a default, and we will see that inside the tab. And there is support for 3D Studio and FBX. So over on the right side, we have a initial starting point called View, and inside the View tab we talk about activities, our levels, and our hierarchy. We have a search tool, and we talk about all the scenes. Okay, we can pull down the scene view and the scene tab. We can see we have a world, there's a camera, there's a cube, and there's a lamp inside the cube. And our camera is facing the cube, and we have a coordinate system, and our object is placed in the center. Okay. And below the scene thing, we have different tabs and buttons we can press. There is one for the activity data display edits. We have one that's for scene. We have a render layer in the scene which should be selected. Click the next tab, we have an object for the scene that shows the character, and we have talks about color management, gravity, audio, simplicity. Moving over to the next tab, we have the world, and we have some things like ambient occlusion and indirect light and environmental light. These things are important when we think about our game world or our viewing scene. Next we have the cube itself. We talk about its local, its rotational, and its scale. We talk about 3D graphics in a later time. And keep in mind that we're talking about the XYZ plane. You can think about the left hand or the right hand rule for that particular session. Our next button, we talk about cube constraints in this tab, and we could click the button and we see things for motion tracking, transform, tracking, and relationship. The next tab we have, it says Add Modifier, and inside the Add Modifier we have Modify, Generate, Deform, and Simulate. So for those using those, there is some work, and we also see that we have quite a bit of functionality from this free tool. Clicking the next button, we have some support for using normals and vector groups and shape keys and UV maps, geometry data, and so forth. The next button talks about materials, and we see that for our base material is default. It says gray color. The checkered pattern in the back represents transparency. So we have an object behind a transparent layer, and we have specular, there's diffuse light, and shaping, and there we have work for mirroring, and we have some other additional options after that. We can also pull and drag and drop the menu if we want to, and we can stretch it out if we do not have all the features I am showing you in this video. Our next button talks about textures, and we can also define different textures for our objects, and that is important when creating any type of 3D or cinematic event. Next we have a particle system. We can also make flares and other types of systems using the tool. We can make fire, we can make light sources, we can make reflection on the cars, or the sun, the glare, the corona from the environmental systems. And our final tab here we talk about is physics. And inside the physics tab we can enable force fields, soft bodies, fluids. We can also make water inside the system, which is a nice thing if you think about buoyancy and other physics materials. And it's also good for using these tools. We can, since it has a game engine, we can make solid projects. We can have, suppose we're making a massive multiplayer online only game, or MMO, or if we were making a first-person shooter, we have gun effects, and we have particle effects, and even we have support for clothing. We can make the wind move, we can make our clothes. There's support for making hair and other tools. But first we have to start with this basic shape. So our goal in this video, at this point, is to talk about some of the hotkeys and things for the next portion of this video. So we will start off talking about certain things that are used in here. We have a scale, a timeline across the bottom. There are some features here. There are different buttons we can press to change the perspective of the camera inside of this modeling tool. That's the best way to think about this tool. It's a modeling tool at first. Before we do any extra work, or before we write scripts and assign them to our motion tool, there are other features which we will go into later. Inside of the system, we can make other objects, and we can also create environmental effects. Suppose we want to have a war, we can make several objects, have an animation chain, and so we can have suppose we're making a real-time strategy game and there's a war taking place, and so we want to go over and have a swarm of agents come down the hill and have a battle, and we could do that. But we'll talk about some of the tools, and we'll go over some of the hotkeys. There are a lot of hotkeys we can use inside of this program. This program has been in development for quite some time, and maybe not even one video would be enough, or two videos would be enough to talk about all the things you could do with the Blender engine. So first we'll talk about some of the hotkeys. At this point we'll go over some hotkeys. We've talked about the system, and hopefully the system has already been installed on your computer before you watch this video, because sometimes it takes time to install the system or test the system. If you have an older laptop, it may not work. or if you have another system. There are other 3D modeling tools out there which can be used. There are some that use different hotkeys. There are some default hotkeys in any system. For development on this platform, we were using Windows. So pressing Control Z will undo. Suppose, keep in mind if your keyboard works, Control Z will undo certain errors. Clicking on the initial shape with our mouse, there is a left and a right button. With your left button, we select a shape. Okay, we can do that. We can see if you select it with the right shape, you can move the object. Moving the object is important, but later you may want to scale your shape based off some type of initial model. You may want to make a character. So to have a character, you need to have the front, this side, and maybe the top view for creating an adequate character. Your character is then in turn made from concept art. So it's not a good idea to make a character out of solid concept art. The concept art would in turn need to be groomed so that you can get geometrically sound parameters for a character. If you needed to match the character's nose with the center of his face, or if you wanted to make hair, hair can be an additional component to a character. For this video, we will just use the mouse and the keyboard. There are other graphics tools which can be used to create better models, and there are other low costs, like having a digital art tool, which can be used to create textures for our models. We will first start off with creating low poly models. A low poly model would be great for porting to a mobile device if we're going to create our first games or our first project. If we wanted to make something for, suppose it was a real-time strategy game for some Vulkan library or some OpenGL application, we might want to get the lowest number of polygons to increase the performance. We can then in turn port over to newer devices, old and new devices. Creating some projects may require having both types, the low, high, and medium models inside of the system. To keep in mind the camera perspective, if the characters and the screens, it is only, I suppose, keep in mind there's not very much detail you can render on a screen that's 8 inches wide. So having the low poly model and having great textures over a low poly model might be a bit more desirable. You can spend too much time creating certain aspects of a game world or a cinematic world, and that time can be used to create more models, and it's probably better to have great textures on low poly models than more polygons on and few textures. But it just really depends on the budget and the ending project. So we will try to make sure that there is enough information provided inside of the core series to accommodate people who do this professionally, as well as those people who experiment with the tools and use the tools at their own leisure. Using the Blender tool or any other 3D modeling tool takes not more than just time. It takes some experience, and your first models may not be the best models. So if you were a big fan of superheroes, or if you were a big fan of furniture, or if you were a big fan of creating food, if you wanted to make your first activity be a fruit basket, in turn you would want to take some time out and conceptualize your ideas. Well, pressing certain keys inside of Blender is important when deciding which perspective we want to start with. Making a character, the character should be in the T pose, which is when the character's legs are down and his arms are out to the side, because it makes the character easier to be rigged. It's a standard, and when you think about a character in the game world, every character is the same. They're just objects, and the programs and systems manipulate the systems. So it's no reason for you to do extra work and other than make decent models. Inside of the Blender tool, we have some other systems in place. If we press the mouse button, we can pan the camera, and up in the upper hand corner we see the user perspective, and you can experiment with this pressing certain keys. One common question usually brought up by students is, why are we being shown all the keys? Because the systems change and we need to know what we are trying to accomplish each time. The best way of learning how to use a new system is to experiment. So we will go over keys as they are needed for our activity. The Blender tool also has functionality for showing the keys on screen, and that is important when demonstrating this event in a live demonstration. But if the lecture is a timed activity or a course by course or class by class activity, we might want to show you keys as need be necessary. It is also a good idea over time to create a portfolio, a decent portfolio with concept art and 3D models, animations, and even programs which showcase your finished models. Concepts are good for showing your artistic talent. They are good for showing people how you approach a conception. And inside the Blender tool, there's also functionality for creating entire scenes. Suppose we want to display a highway system, or if we want to display a alley brawl. We can make sound effects, and we can match those sound effects to keyframes, and we can show off the ninja fight or other systems that we've put in place. We can also duplicate models inside of the Blender system. Suppose we wanted to have the same polygon, we needed 2 spheres or 2 rectangles. Or if we're making robots, you might want to have a factory of robots for our demonstration. We can do that inside of the Blender system. There's also a community for and a Python API reference sheet, and also other operation sheets. The system also holds for our last changes, and we can also go backwards. We can toggle between going backwards between our units. There's also a Blender store inside of the key, and we also get the latest version of Blender. And there's also some support for having a portable version of Blender in case we wanted to put it on our flash stick or move it from our laptop to our desktop computer. Suppose you had a better desktop than you had a laptop, or you wanted to make more than just one model. Suppose you had to have a project finished by Monday. Then you might need to create a timeline and have different layouts, different colorations for the same character. If you had 6 different types of quote-unquote alien or 6 different types of hero, you can just change, for a low polygon model, the painting of the face, or that would be a different character. You can change the girls from a boy, like their hair. If you just, that was or their attire. If it was, keep in mind that different types of media that need to be culturally appropriate, and they need to match. If one character leans, all your characters should lean. Things need to be formatted to match the artistic style. While you go over your model and look at some stylings for characters, we also need to think about what type of environment and what type of surface we are being pushed into. The lighting, we talk about the color wheel and other graphic design features, making appropriate appendages for digits and natural motion of characters, and for animations. Our character should not be a slinky unless he is a slinky. Inside of the Blender system, we also have support for importing images, and those images can be used to create the T-pose. We need a top and side views. We also have support for creating other cameras. We can have more than one camera inside the scene. We can put each perspective camera on screen and go over some of the features there. We also have some support for Blender rendering and rendering cycles, and for making a game. There are Blender games which are available. People have made some nice, decent projects. The Blender tool has been around for quite some time, so there are a lot of modeling and models which can be imported into our Blender system to practice with. Suppose you were not so good at using and manipulating, so we could also modifications, or is the idea of changing a character or an object to match our design. Suppose we were bad at making houses. So at first, all of our characters inside of our game were just geometric shapes. They were just rectangles, and we just painted the outside of the rectangle. And we put a car in here, and inside the scene, we can use physics to drive the car. There are also application templates, and there's settings. Pressing the Control-Alt-U goes over user preferences, and inside the user preferences, variant. There are also add-ons and other features that we can add to the Blender tool for your specific use, your specific needs. Keep in mind that if you are installing this on your system, you might want to install those systems and features with administrator privileges, because if you have more than one person using your Blender tool, or if this is in the lab, it may not be a great thing, because I'm not really sure how long it takes to save, or how permanent the add-ons would be. There is also, clicking the eye icon, there's a drop down here. We have features for properties and outliers and logical editor and movie clip editors and other systems. And keep in mind that if you make a mistake inside of Blender, you can always just close the program and open it back again. That's, to me, because it loads so fast, it's written in Python, it closing the program and turning the program back on and just loading your model again, it will keep it from going back to all these changes, because it has a lot of settings, and the default, making it as default, I don't really think it saves any of the features. Not to my knowledge, it may not save all the features, all your changes every time you use it. You can also pull off your tabs and replace them onto the scene, or inside of your frame of Blender if you wanted your tools to be on the left or the right side. It has support for that, and they can be pulled and dragged and dropped and manipulated to seat our purposes. And for more information, please visit our website at DarkCybernetics.